It was a brisk autumn afternoon in Washington, D.C., and the streets were alive with the rustle of golden leaves. Barron Trump, taking a rare stroll alone, found himself near a bustling park. The Secret Service agents trailed discreetly, allowing him a semblance of freedom he seldom enjoyed. He loved these quiet walks. They gave him a break from the overwhelming expectations of being in the public eye. As he approached a weathered bench, his eyes were drawn to a man sitting hunched over, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The man's military jacket, adorned with faded patches, told a story of service and sacrifice, but his face bore the lines of hardship. Intrigued, Barron hesitated, wondering if he should walk over. "Spare some change, young man," the veteran asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Caught off guard, Barron stopped. His upbringing had exposed him to power, wealth, and privilege, but this moment felt raw and real. He reached into his pocket, realizing he didn't have cash on him. "I don't have any money," Barron replied apologetically, "but can I sit and talk with you?" The man, surprised, gestured to the empty spot on the bench. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug. They began to talk. The man introduced himself as David, a former Marine who had fallen on hard times after returning from duty. His family had drifted apart, and the transition to civilian life had been anything but smooth. Listening intently, Barron felt a pang of guilt for how little he knew about struggles like David's. David chuckled bitterly. "You probably don't understand what it's like, kid. People look right through you when you're like this." Barron shook his head. "You'd be surprised. People make assumptions about me too. They think they know me because of my name, but they don't." The unlikely connection struck a chord with Barron. As they spoke, something about David's resilience and dignity amidst hardship moved him deeply. The conversation stretched into the early evening. The fading sunlight painted the park in hues of amber, but neither Barron nor David seemed to notice. David shared stories of his time in the Marines, missions in far-off countries, camaraderie with fellow soldiers, and the pride of serving his nation. But as he spoke, the warmth in his voice turned to melancholy. "I didn't think life would be this hard after I came back," David admitted. "I lost my job after my company downsized. My wife tried to hold things together, but she couldn't anymore. And now here I am, a ghost of the guy I used to be." Barron listened intently, his usual stoic demeanor softening. He couldn't reconcile the image of the strong, dedicated Marine David described with the man sitting next to him, worn down by life. "What about the government? Aren't there programs to help veterans like you?" Barron asked, genuinely curious. David gave a hollow laugh. "Sure, there are programs. Mountains of paperwork, endless waiting lists. You can't survive on promises, kid." Barron frowned. His sheltered life hadn't prepared him for this kind of reality, but he felt an undeniable pull to do something. "What do you need the most right now?" he asked. David hesitated, then gestured toward a small duffel bag by his feet. "A little dignity, a roof over my head, a chance to start again." The sincerity in his words hit Barron hard. He stood abruptly. "Wait here," he said, determination flashing in his eyes. David raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Where are you going?" Barron didn't answer. He walked quickly toward his security detail, who had been keeping their distance. After a hushed conversation, one of the agents handed him a phone. Moments later, Barron returned to David. "I want to help," Barron said simply, "and I think I can." David looked at him, disbelief written all over his face. "Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me." Barron shrugged. "Maybe I don't, but everyone deserves a second chance, right?" The next morning, David woke up in a modest motel room, clean sheets and a hot shower replacing the cold park bench he had slept on for weeks. On the nightstand was a note in Barron's neat handwriting. "I'll be back tomorrow morning. Don't go anywhere." Barron, true to his word, Barron arrived the next day with fresh clothes, breakfast, and an offer. "I don't want to just hand you money," Barron began. "I want to help you get back on your feet, but you have to trust me." David, still overwhelmed by the previous day's events, nodded cautiously. "What do you have in mind?" Barron explained his plan, connecting David with organizations that specialized in veteran support, arranging temporary housing, and even helping him apply for jobs. But it wasn't just logistics. Barron wanted David to regain his confidence. "You're not just a veteran," Barron said. "You're a fighter. You just need someone to remind you of that." David stared at the young man before him, his disbelief slowly giving way to gratitude. "No one's ever done this for me," he said quietly. "Not even people I knew." Barron grinned. "Well, it's about time someone did." They spent the rest of the day visiting outreach programs and filling out forms. Barron was tireless, his determination infectious. By the end of the day, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Barron's involvement didn't go unnoticed. Photos of him helping David, taken by passers-by in the park, began circulating online. Soon, the story gained traction. Barron Trump spotted assisting homeless veteran. Social media buzzed with reactions, some praising Barron's kindness, others questioning his motives. At first, Barron ignored the attention, focusing solely on David's progress. But when a journalist approached him outside a veteran support center, he decided to speak. "This isn't about me," Barron told the reporter. "It's about David and others like him, who deserve better than what they've been given." The interview went viral, sparking a wave of donations to veteran charities and conversations about homelessness in America. Barron's simple act of kindness had become a movement. Meanwhile, David's life was beginning to change. With Barron's support, he secured a part-time job at a local repair shop, a small but significant step forward. "You've given me a chance," David told Barron one evening. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Barron replied. "Just promise me you'll keep going." David's progress was steady, but the journey wasn't without its challenges. Adjusting to a structured life again after years of instability was harder than he anticipated. The job at the repair shop gave him purpose, but the nights were the toughest, facing memories of the past, doubts about the future, and the looming question of whether he could truly rebuild his life. Barron, however, didn't let David falter. He called or visited every few days, offering encouragement and practical advice. He also brought along books, clothes, and small gifts, always thoughtful and tailored to David's needs. "You remind me of my dad sometimes," David admitted one day. "He always told me to keep moving forward, no matter what." Barron smiled. "Then listen to his advice. You're moving forward, and that's what matters." As weeks turned into months, David grew stronger, not just physically, but mentally. He began attending therapy sessions arranged by a veteran outreach program, confronting the emotional scars left by his military service and the struggles that followed. One evening, Barron surprised David with an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter of recommendation from Barron himself, accompanied by another letter from a nonprofit organization offering David a full-time position as a community outreach coordinator. The job was more than just employment. It was a chance to help others who were walking the same path he had just escaped. "I don't know what to say," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll take it," Barron replied, grinning. "You've got a lot to offer, David. It's time the world saw that." David nodded, his eyes glistening. "I will. Thank you, Barron, for everything." Months later, David stood on the grand stage of a prestigious charity gala, organized by the veteran nonprofit he now worked tirelessly to support. The room was filled with elegantly dressed attendees, many of whom had come to hear his story after seeing news coverage of his friendship with Barron Trump. The atmosphere was electric, with anticipation palpable among the crowd. David, once a homeless man struggling to find hope, now stood tall and confident, a symbol of resilience and redemption. He began his speech with a steady voice, though the emotion in his tone was unmistakable. "There was a time when I thought I was invisible," he said, scanning the room, "when I believed that no one cared if I lived or died. But then someone did care. Someone saw me, not as a statistic, not as a lost cause, but as a person worth saving." In the audience, Barron sat with his family, his hands folded neatly in his lap as he listened. His expression was one of quiet pride. Melania and Donald Trump, sitting beside him, exchanged glances, clearly moved by David's words. The audience was captivated, many leaning forward in their seats, their eyes glistening with tears. David paused, his voice catching for a moment before he continued. "That someone was Barron Trump," he said, gesturing toward Barron, who flushed slightly but smiled. "A young man who could have ignored me like so many others, but he didn't. Instead, he gave me a second chance, and that act of kindness became the turning point in my life." The crowd erupted into applause, some even rising to their feet. David stood back for a moment, letting the sound wash over him, his heart swelling with gratitude. When the applause subsided, he shared the journey that had followed. He spoke about the struggles of rebuilding his life, the support he'd received from the nonprofit, and the friendship that had inspired it all. After the event, Barron made his way through the crowd to find David. Before Barron could say a word, David pulled him into a bear hug, his gratitude pouring out in his embrace. "I owe you everything," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "No, you don't," Barron replied, his smile genuine and warm. "You did this, David. I just gave you a little push." Their story didn't end with that hug. News outlets continued to cover the bond between Barron and David, calling it a beacon of hope in challenging times. The story inspired countless others, sparking a wave of community-driven efforts to support veterans and the homeless. Donations poured into the nonprofit, enabling it to expand its programs and help more people like David. For Barron, the experience left an indelible mark. He began dedicating more of his time to philanthropic work, using his platform to advocate for causes he believed in. "This taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever," he often said in interviews. David, now a respected advocate for veterans, traveled the country sharing his story. At every event, he reminded audiences of the power of compassion. "If a young man like Barron Trump could see the value in me when I couldn't see it myself," he would say, "then maybe it's time we all started looking at each other differently." Their friendship became a symbol of what was possible when people chose kindness over indifference. It was a lesson neither of them would ever forget, a testament to the unbreakable bond they had formed and the countless lives they had touched along the way.